Welcome to the SBCA podcast, Component Connection, where we explore the people, ideas, trends, and innovations shaping the structural framing industry. Regardless of how you touch this industry, we're glad you're here. Enjoy the episode.
Hello, this is Ashley Baker, the Director of Education for SBCA, and I'll be your host for this episode of Component Connection. Today's episode is one I've been looking forward to because it highlights one of the most dynamic and honestly one of the most impactful parts of BCMC and the Framer Summit. We're talking about supplier-led education sessions. Now, if you've attended BCMC before, you've probably sat in on one of these sessions. Maybe you walked in because the topic caught your attention. Maybe someone told you, hey, you need to go check this one out. Chances are you walked out with something you could actually use, much like all of our education sessions at BCMC. That's what makes supplier education that's coming from component manufacturers, education that's coming from framers, so different. But today, I want to do two things. I want to talk specifically about supplier education, as I mentioned, and I want to start with those of you who plan to attend BCMC and really define what these sessions, specifically supplier education sessions, are and why they've become such a valuable part of the BCMC experience. Second, and just as important, I want to speak directly to our suppliers. And that is because applications are open right now. If you've ever considered presenting, or if this is your first time hearing about it, I want to give you insight into what makes a strong application, what the review process actually looks like, and of course, how to not just get selected, but how to deliver a session that truly hits the mark. So whether you're planning your schedule for BCMC or thinking about stepping onto the stage yourself, this episode is for you. Let's talk about what supplier-led education sessions, what these actually are. So we're going to ground this a little bit in, again, what these sessions are. We are currently, I will say, soliciting applications for supplier-led sessions at BCMC and Framer Summit, which of course takes place in Columbus, Ohio, which is September 14th through the 18th this fall, 2026. These sessions run from Tuesday, September 15th through Thursday, September 17th. With the majority of the supplier education happening on Tuesday. If you've been before, you know Tuesday is one of the busiest and most energy-filled days of the entire event. These are sessions that are held in two primary environments, breakout rooms, which offer sort of a more traditional focused learning session. And this year, we are adding some dedicated space on the show floor, which creates a much more open, high-energy environment where learning and engagement happen right in the middle of the action. One of the big changes this year is that each session is going to be an hour long. So supplier-led education sessions in prior years at BCMC they've only been 45 minutes long. So the hour is very intentional. We made this decision because we really wanted these sessions to be long enough to deliver meaningful content. Obviously, 60 minutes is short enough that it forces presenters to stay focused, relevant, and of course, to keep that information impactful. Within that hour, there is a dedicated time for Q&A. And we will, of course, come back to this later, but that Q&A portion is where I think some of the most valuable moments happen. And that is because that's where content shifts from general to specific to directly applicable. So here's the most important thing that I want you to understand. These are education sessions, not product demos. And this goes for those of you who plan to attend, but also for those of you who are suppliers and considering, of course, completing an application. These sessions are designed to deliver practical insights, real-world solutions, emerging trends, and even some of the more innovative approaches. These are things that attendees can take back to their operations and actually implement. That is the standard for these types of education sessions, and that's why they matter. Now, these sessions have been wildly popular for years. So let's talk about why these sessions are consistently drawing such strong attendance, because they do. Year after year, supplier-led education sessions are among the most well-attended sessions at BCMC. And that really doesn't happen by accident. It happens because of the value that they deliver. Think about the audience at BCMC: component manufacturers, framers, designers, of course, other suppliers. You've got your business owners, your operators. These are people who are dealing with real challenges every single day. They're not looking for theory. They're looking for what works, what's changing, what should I be paying attention to right now? And these supplier-led education sessions are uniquely positioned to answer those questions. Suppliers are often on the front lines of innovation. They're working across multiple companies and markets, seeing patterns, challenges, and even solutions really at scale. So when those insights are shared in an educational format, it resonates. Now, over the years, we've seen a wide range of types of sessions. Single presenters, who are sharing a case study. You've got the technical deep dives. But consistently, the format that receives the strongest feedback, those are panels. And if you think about it, it makes sense. Panels bring multiple perspectives, natural conversation. They really have that built-in engagement piece. Instead of one voice, you get a dialogue. Instead of presentation, you get a discussion. And for attendees, I think that feels more real, more relatable, and often more valuable. That is, of course, not to say that a single presenter is not valuable or doesn't offer the same quality of session. Of course, that can be true. But over the years that we've done this, we've consistently seen panels garner that attention and really positive feedback. Now, I think one of the things it's important to really think through, and this is where we're going to kind of shift a little bit, and I'm going to talk directly to our suppliers. Because, of course, if you're listening right now and thinking, this sounds great, but is it worth the effort? I really want to answer that clearly. Yes. And here's why. This is one of the few opportunities where you can step into a space that's not sales driven. It is not transactional, but purely value driven. And when you do that well, it changes how people see you. I have been privy to these conversations on many occasions. Instead of being viewed as a product or a service or a vendor, you become a resource. You're now a partner, a thought leader. And I think that shift is really powerful. Beyond positioning, there's something else that also happens: momentum. When you deliver a session that really resonates, people don't just leave and forget about it. They follow up. They find you on the show floor. They continue the conversation. They bring a colleague back. And suddenly, what started as a 1-hour session turns into multiple conversations, new relationships, and often new opportunities. And that's the part that's hard to quantify, but incredibly real. All right, so let's get into a little bit of the nitty gritty. Let's talk application process. This is where I think a lot of people either get it or they miss the mark. And here are some of the key dates that I want to start us off with. So applications are currently live. The deadline to submit an application is May 29th, 2026 at 11:59 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. There is a review period that happens the second week of June, so June 8th through the 12th. And if suppliers are accepted, they will be notified of that acceptance by June 19th. All applications are reviewed by a panel. All applications are also anonymous. So there's no, well, I know this company or I know this individual and I want to, show them some favoritism. Anything and everything that can be removed that would be identifying information is removed so that this is truly as anonymous as possible. And I will tell you that the panel looks for several specific things. Number one, of course, the value of the content. Two, timeliness of the topic. Three is the uniqueness of your approach. So how are you going to deliver this information and make it relevant? And finally, the credibility and experience of the presenter or presenters delivering that information. Something else that's really important to consider is that submitting early does not necessarily give you an advantage. We are not reviewing applications on a rolling basis. So we take all applications and want to give you ample time to put together a very thoughtful, well-articulated application. But we review these again as a panel the second week in June, and every application is reviewed together. So it's not about necessarily being first. I can tell you from ample experience that clear, thoughtful, and complete applications are typically the ones that are selected. These are, thorough, they're detailed, they're not vague, it's not surface level. They can clearly answer, what it is you're teaching or sharing, why it matters right now, and how it's going to help those who are, of course, sitting in the audience. What are the takeaways? I think there's also one more thing I want to add, and that really is, when there's something a little bit different about a session, and it could simply be, the approach to delivering the information. It could be content. I think there's typically a critical industry need that may be addressed there. And those tend to resonate very well with individuals who are making the selection on the panel. Now, when it comes to actually delivering a great session, this is a piece that is considered when we are reviewing the applications. And this is, I think, where some of the really great ideas can either land or fall flat. And for those of us who are reviewing applications, it's one in which we look at pretty critically, right? How is this information going to be received? First and foremost, it's important to know that slides are required. I am a big proponent of good slide design. What does that mean? If I'm an attendee and I'm sitting in the audience, here's the reality. If your slides are overloaded with text, if they're hard to read, if they look like a document instead of a presentation, you will lose your audience, and quickly, without even realizing it. Instead, keeping your slides clean, keeping them visual, limiting the amount of text, they should be used to support your message, not replace it. If you've got more information to share, we can always create an additional document that can be shared via the BCMC app, so attendees have that. I think it's, an additional downloadable handout or resource that can make a really significant impact when your slides are up there and maybe don't have all of the text, verbatim, obviously with what it is you're saying. The end goal is obviously that they're listening, that they're hearing, that they're understanding what you're explaining. And that is where I go back to slides should support your message, not replace it, right? We're not reading from slides. So that's something I think that's really critical to consider. And really, you don't have to choose between, sharing everything and keeping your presentation engaging. You can do both. So if we talk about engagement, this is the difference between a good session and a great one. You want to build the interaction. You ask questions, you encourage discussion. And most importantly, I think you really lean into the Q&A time. That is always, where content becomes very real and specific, and I think immediately applicable for a lot of people who are sitting in the audience. Finally, I want to just remind those of you who are thinking through, submitting an application, you're not there to present. And that might be a weird thing to say as I'm asking for, essentially presentation applications. You're there to connect. And that is something that I think is undervalued, or we tend to overlook when putting together, an application of this nature. As you think about applying or preparing or thinking through, developing a schedule to sit through these types of education sessions, if you are going to be an attendee at BCMC, know, of course, that you're not doing it alone. SBCA and myself, as the Director of Education, are always here to support you or to answer any questions you might have about a session that you wish to attend. That can be, for those of you submitting applications, helping shape your session idea. I'm a huge fan of trying to help you strengthen your application, so I will offer any guidance that I can within reason, of course. But I love thinking through and brainstorming and, sharing maybe ideas in the past that we've had that have been particularly successful to help you think through and frame any presentation that you might be considering. Ultimately, we want you to succeed. And if you're an attendee, we want you to have a great experience when you're at BCMC. And that's really and truly, why these sessions are typically so strong and so well attended. And ultimately, they make the entire conference stronger as a whole, in turn benefiting the industry. It's always great when attendees can walk away better than when they came. So if you've been thinking about applying, of course, I would love for you to take the time, be intentional, put together something that truly adds value. If you've got any questions or if there's anything that I can do or anyone at SBCA can do to help in these efforts, please don't hesitate to reach out. I can be reached by email at abaker@sbcacomponents.com. We really appreciate you joining us today. I think supplier education, as well as our CM-focused and framer-focused education, they're going to be a huge success this year. Stay tuned for an upcoming podcast that I will have on our CM and framer education with a few teasers as well. We are really looking forward, of course, to seeing you in Columbus, where we can all gather and learn and experience all that there is to experience at BCMC, especially on the show floor. And that's a wrap. Thank you for listening to SBCA's podcast, Component Connection. If you enjoyed this episode and found it valuable, please like it and share it with others. Stay up to date and in the know by subscribing to Component Connection on whatever podcast platform you use most.
Thanks for listening to Component Connection, brought to you by SBCA. If there's a topic you'd like us to explore in a future episode, email us at podcast@sbcacomponents.com.